Welcome to Behind the Play, a video and podcast product of The Hoop Show that explores the lives of Geelong players past and present, as well as the off-field figures that are keeping us Geelong strong, and awesome folk that represent other clubs around the country as well. And in this particular case, representing his club from afar. Jesse, welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much for having me. Love the operation you've got going on over there. I am calling in from England, the UK. I think this is my second time I've done a podcast since I moved here. So thank you very much for having me.
It's awesome to have you on board, and it'll be a great chat to pick your brain about the platform that you're building, doing it whilst overseas, talking about the Eagles, talking about the game more broadly. It's gonna be a good time. So thanks for coming aboard, mate.
Oh, anytime, mate. Happy to be here.
So for you, where did footy, I guess, first enter your life in the first place? Was it one of those scenarios where you were kind of almost born footy in hand? Was it kind of thrust upon you by family pretty quickly, or did it take you a little while to discover it in the first place?
It's a good question. I think the answer for me is actually a little bit unconventional. So I actually was born into a family that is from Perth, but travelled a lot. My dad got a job and worked overseas in Thailand and stuff like that. So when I was born, I was physically born in Perth, but lived the first 8 years of my life in Thailand. So in terms of my first footy memory, I reckon I remember Dad watching the 2000 grand final, because for some reason the grand final was the only game you could watch internationally back then.
Yeah.
So I reckon that was the 2000 grand final, and I remember watching it going, what the hell is going on? And it wasn't until I moved back to Australia when I was about 8. So this was about 2002, where I really started to appreciate what footy was. And I remember probably taking an interest in the 2002 final series. I remember we got smashed by Essendon. Brisbane obviously won the grand final. And then 2003 was probably the first year I was like consciously, hoping the Eagles would win games, if that makes sense. So yeah, probably since 2003, I've been a pretty big fan. And then I've moved away twice since to 2 different countries. And year by year, the love only compounds for that footy club. So yeah, a little bit unconventional, but that's how I became a diehard.
Yeah, it's certainly, as you say, kind of unconventional there, because I guess a lot of people, and I guess this does even extend to the current day where you are again overseas, there's that continuity that I think always kind of fuels the fire. And I guess these days we're more connected to the game than what we were in, say, 2000, for example, where you might only get the grand final. It's pretty easy to get a legal or illegal access to the football anywhere in the world. So as many people find when it comes to trying to pull in the NBA or something like that from Australia, it's pretty easy to do so through a range of different means, approved and less approved. So the access is there, and I guess that helps a little bit. But as you say, a little bit unconventional as a result, but no less fascinating. And so, was it always going to be the Eagles at that point?
It was, yes. So, like I said, my whole family's from Perth, or my parents were both from Perth. We moved away. So I was born into that Eagles family. I know that my dad was a mad keen Perth Demons fan when he was a young man before the AFL became what it was. And I do know that he was a Carlton fan briefly, because Peter Pizzotto joined Carlton. That was his favourite player from the Perth Demons and the Waffle. But thankfully, he saw the light. And when the VFL became the AFL,
local,
he went with the Eagles, which I'm very grateful for, considering what's happened to Carlton in my lifespan, and not trying to throw shots. But I'm just saying, the Eagles have given me both a lot of pain and a lot of joy, and it's a great football club to go for.
Yeah, I completely understand. And of course, there was, obviously another WA-based team that emerged later on, and they haven't had the success that the Eagles have had. So it seems like it all worked out pretty well for you.
It's true. It's kind of an interesting experience going for West Coast, because I know that this, they're a big club and they're successful, and I'm grateful for that. But I got to say, I've also seen on more than one occasion this team or this club, brought to its knees and go through the entire spectrum of emotions as a football fan. So it's been different. It's been heartbreaking at times, but I think that just makes the highs better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair. And I guess, obviously the highs are pretty well documented. We'll certainly get to some of those, especially some of the premiership success and those sort of things shortly. You mentioned obviously some of the lows, and there have been a number of them, unfortunately. I guess when you reflect on some of those moments, whether it's kind of the present day where just the drop off, and it's kind of been hard for the Eagles to pull themselves off the canvas when it comes to kind of ladder position, to unfortunate things, like I say, a Ben Cousins incident, or the variety of different things that have kind of occurred over the years. How do you wrestle with that? Because they're big, hard hitting scenarios.
Well, I got to say, as a 30-year-old fan who has been through it before, like seeing the team now, I think with my life experience, I know that it's going to come back again, and I have faith in this footy club. And we've been through not this exact situation before, but obviously, off-field drama and poor performances on field, embarrassing losses, laughing stock of the comp. So I think right now I'm feeling fairly resilient, and I'm open-minded and willing to be patient about this process. I got to say that 2007 was a hard year, or the back end of 2007, start of 2008, where in a series of months we lost Chris Judd, and I'd only seen the Eagles like make finals every year up to that point. Ben Cousins, obviously. I remember there was that final where I think both of them got injured against Port, and then I think that was both of their last game for the Eagles. I could be wrong, but losing them in quick succession, Judd walking out on the club. Back then, when a player like left his club, it was quite a big deal. It's far less of a big deal now because it's kind of part of the game.
Yeah, it's a far more transient sort of game that we've got at the moment. Whereas back then, yeah, you're right. If you had to leave, there was probably some animosity behind the whole thing, and certainly a lot of questions would get asked.
100%. And the Eagles, not to pump them up too much, and I'm kind of bashing them and talking them up in the same breath, but their retention has always been pretty good. So like when players walk out, it feels like a big deal. And this Chris Judd walking out on us felt like all of our collective girlfriends cheated on us. It was heartbreaking. And then the Cuz situation. So yeah, that was a bit difficult to process at the time. But I got to say, I think the club buckling and then rebuilding is kind of where my love sort of really started. It really went up a few levels from being just an Eagles fan who really liked footy to being a diehard, because I saw the club reinvent itself with a whole new generation of players, Nick Naitanui, Luke Shuey. And I think seeing that club evolve from what it was to eventually what would become a 2018 premiership team, I think that journey I'll always hold dear to my heart. And I don't know if any other premiership the West Coast win, hypothetically in the future, will ever mean as much to me as 2018, because I saw the full spectrum of emotions, the full cycle. So yeah, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. And I guess I guess as a Geelong supporter, I guess the scenarios are slightly different. I mean, obviously you talk about the low of 2007, which was the great high for Cats fans of 2007, exploding and finally breaking a drought there. But I think kind of 2011 through to the 22, it's the same amount of time that passed, and it was a similar-ish sort of arc. I think we persisted with the elderly players, obviously a little bit longer. I think it was just the demographic of the respective teams when they first hit their peak that kind of dictated that a bit. But the cycling out of old faces whilst new ones came in, and what that does for a team, and the constant pushing and being close but not quite. And we saw that with West Coast. We think about like the early teen periods with having a crack at Hawthorn there in grand finals and those, and I think about 2000, I think it was 11 where you played us in the prelim or something like that as well. Yep. It was a team that came really, really close on a few occasions. You could see that the club was on the right track. And maybe it was just missing one or two key things before it really consolidated. And yeah, obviously culminated finally in 2018 with a pretty incredible grand final. I think every Victorian was certainly on your side that day, let alone obviously your local support. Well, I guess interesting, question for me is when it does come to grand final day, and it's a two-team town, and we know that there's a fierce rivalry between Freo and West Coast supporters. Come grand final day, and Freo's not there, West Coast is. What do the Freo supporters do? Do they jump ship? Are they climbing aboard, or are they staunchly Collingwood for the day?
Absolutely not. This is completely anecdotal. It's just one man's perspective, but I find there are a lot more Eagles fans that are sympathetic to Fremantle than there are Fremantle fans sympathetic to West Coast. So you will get the odd occasional WA fan. Yeah. But again, I'm not trying to sound patronizing when I say this, but I think because Fremantle's kind of always had an underdog status, they're far more likely to get neutral or opposite team support. Whereas West Coast seems a team, it's particularly in WA, but this is also something I noticed in Victoria, that is easy to hate. And I like to think it's because we're a big, successful club. That's just the way I'm going to spin it. But I even found in 2018, when I was there for the grand final, just interacting with Victorians, and I don't know if this is reflective of reality, but when I was talking to, Hawthorn supporters complaining about Collingwood being in the grand final, and then someone asking them, "Oh, so you're going for West Coast?" and they're like, "Oh God, no, like I'm not going to go for West Coast." But like, it didn't even
support anyone.
Yeah. Well, they decided to go for Collingwood. So, So to answer your question directly, though, I think no, there's not too much ship jumping, and if there is, it's far more likely to be West Coast fans being sympathetic to Fremantle than the other way around.
No, I mean, I can see that there is a psychology to that whole thing. I think about, and Geelong's kind of found themselves in a similar spot where there was a long time where I could never imagine us being kind of hated or disliked by other supporters. But I think because we've been up for so long, people are pretty well tired of us. And I get it, I guess. And you want to see these other teams come through. And so when I think about, this past year, for example, when Geelong misses the finals, my support instantly went to a GWS because they're new and they haven't had success. I think about, Bulldogs because they haven't seen a lot of success. I think about St Kilda because they haven't had a lot of success. And I want to see, there is that kind of, I guess, sympathetic sort of component. And without, wanting to sound like patronizing or, disparaging to those teams, but they haven't had a lot of success yet. And you're like, well, they've slugged away for a long time. Now, GWS is a bit different because they're new. But certainly kind of a lot of those older clubs, they've been fighting and just can't break through for whatever reason. And so you kind of want to see them have a win. So I totally understand the psychology, but yeah, it's a little bit different, I guess, when it's a 2-team town. But it's interesting. Yeah. So I'm not necessarily surprised when you say West Coast supporters are more inclined to throw their support behind Freo if West Coast doesn't have a horse in the race than the other way around. Yeah,
there does seem to be a lot more hatred. Again, this is my perspective, and then you'll interview a Fremantle fan and say West Coast fans are horrible about Fremantle, and that is true. They are sometimes, but yeah, generally speaking, there you won't find a too neutral Fremantle fan. They'll generally pick Fremantle because that's their team, and there is a big geographical divide actually. I will say as well, which I didn't realize about Perth. So when I first moved to Perth. It's a long story. I moved to Australia when I was 8, but it wasn't Perth. And then I moved to Perth for uni when I was 19. So literally at 19 years of age, I went to Perth expecting most of my friends to be West Coast fans that I was making at uni. And because I lived somewhat near Fremantle, I realized it was 97% Fremantle fans. Through my whole 10 years of living in Perth, literally, I reckon 3 to 5% of the friends I made were West Coast fans, then probably 85 Fremantle, and then the rest miscellaneous,
neutrals or whatever.
That surprised me. I mean, it makes sense. There's kind of a north and south divide, but you wouldn't think living where I live that there were more Eagles fans in the world. It's
certainly fascinating to get that little bit of extra. I mean, I guess it makes sense logistically, but you hear all the noise and you see kind of even just member numbers and those sort of things. You think, okay, they're clearly dominating the state, but it still boils down to logistics at the end of the day. So really fascinating. 100%. We spoke about the negatives. Now let's talk about some of those positive moments. And I think about premierships against Sydney. I think about Collingwood. What were those days like for you?
So I'm very lucky. I was in attendance for both 06 and 18. I was also there in 15, but you said positive, so we'll focus on the ones I was there for. 06, I was 12 years old, and my parents just booked a ticket in June to go to the grand final. And admittedly, we had been there the year before, so it was worth a punt. But still, to be there in the same circumstances and the same teams and win by a point was just a fluke. I think that was the best day of my life at that point. But yeah, like I alluded to before, going through that whole journey of seeing the club, fall to pieces, having to follow a lot of that rebuild overseas because I moved to the Middle East when I was 14.
Yeah,
and to follow the football, being international back in 2008 to 2013 is when I lived away. It was literally listening to 6BR. And back in the day, the AFL website used to have this ball tracker and it would just show where the ball was being kicked, but it was about a minute behind. So it was kind of useless.
Oh, yeah, I vaguely recall that. Yeah.
Yeah, the OG days. And so I was trying to collaborate that with 6PR and be like, what's happening? And then and YouTube highlights weren't even a common thing on the AFL YouTube channel. We used to get this weekly show on TV, bizarrely, in the Middle East that had the AFL highlights. So to see any Eagles footage, I had to wait till that show came out on a Monday and see like the 2 minutes of us usually conceding goals because we sucked.
In that window of time, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, that 08 to 10 period was rough. Thankfully, the coverage improved. But to get back to your question, I think, I was so keen on the Eagles in 2015 that I drove over spontaneously for the grand final. Got tickets through a connection and then drove 39 hours to Melbourne, got there Friday morning for the parade, witnessed that grand final where we lost by 8 goals to Hawthorn, that is, and then we drove back Sunday morning. So, we'd sort of been through the ringer to some extent as fans in between 06 and 18. And then, 18 was, probably the best year of my life, maybe excluding this one. But I spontaneously, again, bought tickets to Melbourne, at least a flight to Melbourne in round 9 of that season, which I felt was very brave, or round 10 it was. We'd beaten Richmond by 7 goals at Optus Stadium. And obviously Richmond were the benchmark of the competition, the reigning premiers, and it was the way we beat them that really stunned me. It wasn't just that we beat a good team. It was, wow, we're missing some players here, and yet the system's holding up.
It was a dismantling rather than just catching Richmond on a bad day or something like that. It was a proper dismantle.
Exactly right. And the week before that, I think we played GWS. We were missing Nat Nui, McGovern, and Shuey, and maybe a couple of others. And GWS were a good team that year, and we didn't expect to win. But not only did we win, we won comfortably. And I was just like, there's something different this year. Bought the ticket in round 10. It was like a roller coaster of emotions between then and the end of the season. Nick Nat Nui does another ACL. There was a large belief that we really relied on him, which was justified at the time. Andrew Gaff, like 2 weeks later, belts Andrew Brayshaw. Gaff still wins an All-Australian that year. That's how good he was up until that point. So emotional roller coaster. But finally, it culminated in us getting to the grand final. And the first 5 goals of that game obviously went all to Collingwood. And I'm sitting there going, it's happened again. It's just 2015 all over again. It's like, if I'd get up and leave, will anyone notice? But thankfully I stuck fat. And when the siren went, I remember literally thinking, like, what now? Like, after all the jubilation, there was this period of like, what does my life point at now? I've been waiting for this for 12 years. And it was almost an empty feeling. But then thankfully that subsided and I went back to being absolutely ecstatic.
And so what was your line of sight on the Dom Sheed goal? Because, of course, that's so well documented. It's such an incredible goal. It's the whole sequence of play. Collingwood fans love it, I hear.
They do. Yeah.
They have their complaints and concerns, but we'll give them a platform some other time.
Yeah, that's right.
What was your kind of line of sight on it? Did you have a good positioning for it? Or, I mean, and then just what was the moment like when he actually nailed it?
So the prelude to that was we'd had about 4 shots on goal, which I think gets lost a little bit because who cares? But like we had like Tom Cole misses a set shot, Maston misses one, Ryan hits the post. I think there's another one where he snaps and misses, and we'd had so many opportunities to go in front and we were missing them all. And that's usually a danger sign in footy. When you don't score when you're on top, it usually doesn't go your way.
It comes back to bite you.
Exactly. So to answer your question, I was completely the opposite pocket. The far side of the ground on the other side of the goal. So as he's lining up, I'm sort of looking at him like from parallel, and I have no idea if the goal's going in, and I'm filming because I actually vlogged this particular game. And I remember my hands shaking, but like filming him. And as I see it, I have no idea where the ball's going, and I had no expectation on the kick. I was like, get it behind, we'll set up defensively, intercept, score. That's the way we're going to win this game. But then you just see the crowd rise and then the delayed roar. And the footage is just, you can hear me screaming. And then I go silent because I literally burst into tears because like the moment got to me. And from that point, I felt very confident we were going to win, which was completely a little unjustified considering there's still a little bit of time left. But
not a lot, but enough. Yeah, certainly enough. Exactly.
And then I remember about 30 seconds after that, Jack Darling famously drops the ball in the goal square. It was a tumultuous and a really unenjoyable game to watch, but still probably the best moment of my life.
I mean, the result made it all worth it at the end of the day, right?
100%. And it's so much more enjoyable to watch back on after the fact. But the actual game itself, I didn't say much until the end.
Yeah, I think when you know the result and you're able to rewatch it knowing what's going to happen, a little bit easier to consume, I think, as opposed to live in the moment, whether you're on one side of the TV or live at the ground. It makes me appreciate it as a Geelong supporter, having been there for 7. I missed 9, which is, I guess, the one that would have maybe created those sort of moments you're describing. But 7, 11, 22, and the fact they were pretty large margins, certainly in 2 out of the 3, and even the Collingwood one, it was sorted pretty early in the final term.
True. I can't relate to that. The ones I've watched, we've only had it go right to the wire. I can't imagine what that feeling's like.
The real heart stoppers. So it certainly makes me appreciate the margin, just being okay, great. It's party time. I can celebrate. We know what's going to happen. At the same time, I do feel like I'm missing, and I guess 2009. It's the fault of my employers at the time, who conveniently enough were all St Kilda supporters, and had to come back to their workplace that they owned and ran, and I'd well and truly decorated in time for them to arrive.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Just a little bit of spite because they stopped me from going to the game in the first place.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, look, I get it. It was a family-run business. They needed to keep it up and running. They were going to go. It's their right. It's their business.
Yeah.
But they stopped me from going, and
you had the last laugh.
I got my last laugh. But I guess I would like to kind of experience that really tight one where you come out on the right side of it. I don't know how many of those I'd want to do. You've had a couple. But I guess that real hard. I mean, not that there's no grand final that a team wins regardless of the margin that isn't hard earned, but that real tussle on the day is something I feel like I've missed so far. So I'm sure one day. Hopefully I'm not there to be on the losing side of one of those grand finals, I guess.
True.
So you've mentioned kind of the vlogging, and I guess that kind of leads us pretty well towards all things TrueFooty and what it is that you've been building. So I guess let's start kind of at the beginning there. What was the inspiration behind building this platform in the first place? Not necessarily knowing that we'd go on to become, as things stand now, 25,000 plus subscribers. But I guess at the beginning, what were you looking to achieve, and what made you consider it?
Yeah, so to be honest, how it started was my mate sent me a YouTube podcast of True Geordie. I don't know if you're familiar with True Geordie, but he does a podcast. And that was kind of how it started. And I think I sort of was kind of taken by this idea of being a YouTuber, or at least a content creator who can monetize interesting conversations. That stuck out to me because I'm 30. I'm not quite part of the YouTube generation. And honestly, to that point, I don't think I could have named a YouTuber. Just completely missed that generation. So I'm taken by that concept. And then after a few conversations with said mate, he said, well, why don't we do something about something that we're good at talking about? And I was like, well, that's going to be football, obviously. And we sort of dabbled with making it a general podcast or a footy one. And ultimately, as time goes on, it's just becoming entirely football. But that was how it started, and we gave it a crack. And
with the trade period, correct? Around that 2017 trade period, would that be right?
100%. You've done your research. Well done. That was, funnily enough, a great idea or great time to start a footy podcast is after the season. But we were still feeling we had these creative juices we need to get out. So, did a few podcasts and then decided to keep doing it through the season. And I think somewhere along the line, it just tapped into this creative and ambitious part of me that was like, could we actually make something interesting here, considering a clear lack of other people doing the same thing? And I've heard that sentiment a lot around people like creators like you and I, who, started whenever they started. And they all say the same thing. There's an absence of established platforms like this. So let's just do it.
Why not me? Yeah,
exactly. And I wouldn't say that I had so much validation early. I think it took probably a year before I actually realized anyone watched it. It's very different. Like when you see the views, but it's when somebody actually comments or you meet someone in person, it's kind of this mind blowing thing of like, oh my God, somebody actually watches my videos. Yeah, so that took a long while to come. I think, and then sort of just kept going into 2019, and then it hit a point where a couple of my videos sort of popped, so to speak, went not viral, but like AFL viral. And and then the more it's sort of succeeded, it's become increasingly something I was ambitious about. And then that's certainly like fluctuated over time, but right now it's gotten to a point where I'm doing it full time and am really ambitious about where I want it to go in the future.
It's really impressive what you've built. And, like anyone who's kind of started from humble beginnings, but really turned it into a platform that stands on its own 2 feet, has really kind of deep, meaningful things to say about the game. There's unique voices. And as you say, kind of, I think addresses a need. There was, I think, a lot of people that were looking around going, well, where's my, you've got the big televised stuff, and that's fine. That's, long established across all sports. But in Australia, when it came to the AFL, we just didn't really have that more grassroots kind of conversation that was going on. So, I mean, you'd get it in workplaces and those sort of things, but kind of formalized and documented somewhere. And YouTube's obviously been a wonderful platform for that. Podcast feed's been an amazing platform for those sort of things. And it's really helped grow things. And you've done an amazing job with what you've built there. And as I say, gone on to 25,000 plus subs. And I guess, how does that sit with you now with this? Because it's great that you're able to make it a full-time thing, but I think grappling with that sometimes can be like, holy shit, like I've done this thing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the kind words. I'll be honest, 25,000 was the first time I actually really reflected on that number and realized how many people it was. Not to sound arrogant, but like...
That's a boutique stadium you filled.
Yeah, true. Well, that was the first time I was like, wow, that doesn't actually really compute, or at least that was the first milestone where that really hit for me. And it's been, a long time coming in a sense, because I took a lot of time off in 2022, wasn't really thinking about making this my career. I was doing other stuff in the background, and then I sort of come back to it, and I've sort of trickled over the milestone, and then suddenly it's hit me like, oh wow, that's actually a lot of people. But to this day, to be honest, I don't, with each and every new subscriber that I get, my feeling, it's not really a feeling of validation for what I've done so far. My honest belief, and I don't know if other creators in this space can relate to this, I feel as though people almost subscribe with faith in what it can become, because building it towards a platform that is unique and is like a fan platform for people who love footy. It's novel, well, to some extent. We're all somewhat novel.
Yeah, of course.
That's the way I see it. So I feel like it's people showing faith in me to go and build something cool. Even to this day, I feel that way. So now I'm very motivated to try and repay that faith.
And look, you spoke about it yourself before, were you trying to make a general thing? Were you trying to be too focused on a particular club or a particular, whatever it happens to be? And I think certainly in terms of growing a platform, I think people really appreciate it when they can see someone who, you're clearly a West Coast supporter, but will sit and give deep thought to their club. Obviously, at the moment, you've been putting out a whole range of New Year's resolutions and those sorts of videos relating to all the different clubs. And to be able to get into the weeds with those and speak authoritatively about that club makes someone more likely to invest. Okay, like he's got his alliance, and that totally makes sense. Everyone's got one. But he cares about my club. He cares what's going on. He really tries to pull it apart. And it makes people more inclined to sit up, pay attention, subscribe, become an ongoing kind of client, customer, patron, viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. That authenticity piece is something I've always really strived for. I like to think I do it naturally, but bias is often something you can't even detect in yourself. And I'm always going to be prone to like having watched West Coast more than any other teams. But my personal big belief is that when I'm talking to somebody about football in particular, I like to have those conversations where I know that the person is actually going to give me their actual opinion, not just a dozen reasons why Fremantle's better than West Coast or Collingwood's better than West Coast or whatever. If somebody's talking to me like that, I mean, I get that it's banter. I'm not offended by it, but I kind of shut off from that conversation a little bit.
Sure.
Like I don't really care what they have to say, really, in order to learn. So if I feel like I can trust someone that is actually telling me even if I don't agree with it, their actual opinion, I think that's so much more valuable. And I hope to apply that to TrueFooty, where I definitely don't always get things right. And I definitely am sort of subconsciously biased sometimes, but I am just trying to be authentic as possible. And I like to think that comes across, at least some of the time.
Well, and the other half of that conversation as well is like you've obviously spoken about people where there's maybe a bit more banter to it and they're going to, they're pumping up their own club. But the other half of these sort of things when it comes to genuine, authentic conversation is also having a genuine and authentic, perhaps unique opinion on the whole thing as well, because a very easy trap to fall into. And this is across anything, really. It doesn't have to be podcasts or YouTube creation. it doesn't have to be about football, it could be anything, is you're so influenced by the people around you and the things you hear. And so when you transfer that into a space like talking footy, there's so many content creators out there. There's so many traditional media forms that people can access. This newspapers, TV, radio, whatever happens to be, on top of all of the other stuff, that you've got these other voices in there, and it's very, very easy for some. You might actually agree with that point, but to just sound like you're regurgitating what, I don't know, I'm throwing names out here now at this point, but what Brian Taylor's had to say or what such and such had to say, you sound like you're almost parroting them without actually meaning it. So a huge part of it, and I think why some people really then explode within this space is, I mean, they're engaging and they work the community and those sort of things, but they also have something different. They sound like they have their own voice, and it's a really hard thing for people to nail down. So again, all props to you for having been able to do so. And I think that really is an attracting factor for people when they're when they're searching through the internet, and there are so many options out there. But to find one that they stick with, it's because that person's usually got something genuinely authentic to say.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I appreciate that. It is something that I strive to do. I think it's all about building trust with the viewer. That's kind of the way I see it. And one other sort of branch of content that I do occasionally or opportunistically is if I see a media piece out there, not naming any names, but hypothetically Kane Corns or Peter Sumich over in the West, if I see a take from them that I think is really sensationalist, then what I'll do is I'll do a video breaking down what they say. And I won't necessarily just slaughter them, or at least I won't try to. Sometimes when I'm actually recording, it comes out different. And
look, sometimes the point that's being made is seemingly way off base, but usually there's a nugget of something in there, and then it's the sensational stuff that's piled on top. And so trying to find that core.
Yeah, you just got to sit through, this part's sensationalist, but he is right here. And I think if you do that, people appreciate it, because sometimes, especially if you're a casual fan, and that's something I've kind of realized lately, is my audience isn't necessarily all going to be diehard. Sometimes the viewer that I'm serving is someone who's casual, that's trying to, keep up to date with what's happening. And sometimes it can be really helpful with someone that they trust, sifting through the sensationalist stuff, and suddenly they know, what's going on and what isn't, if that makes sense.
And you've got some people that are, really hardcore, but still specifically their own club. And so they're not going to commit to every single video or piece of content that you put out. They're looking for the thing that they have a direct investment in. And so again, that's where kind of the generalist, but also really well considered opinions that you and others are putting out come into play. But it presents its own challenges and obstacles as well. The other variable in the mix for you is, and we've spoken about a lot of travel and those sort of things, is producing the content, I guess, whilst disconnected by quite a lot of distance. And so these days you're off in the UK, and that you expect that to extend for another 10, 11 months or so, the entirety of season 2024. So I guess as we cast an eye forward to that, but even reflecting on past experiences, maintaining that engagement with the game, being able to continue to build the platform. How's that going? And how do you expect that to go?
Good question. So for a little bit of context, so my move to the UK was kind of just a personal decision. I kind of need to get out of Perth. And to be honest, like when I made the decision, TrueFooty wasn't really top of mind. Somewhere along the line, I was going to get a job here and work in a field related to my degree, and TrueFooty may or may not have happened. And then somewhere along the line, I decided, well, it's something I can use to make money to mitigate all the money I'm spending traveling. I sort of got, and I was dedicated to some extent, even though it wasn't a successful first half of the season YouTube-wise.
Yeah.
And then when I got back from my last trip, I started, making finals content, and that led into the trade period and the draft. And suddenly I just had the best 3 months of YouTube performance of the channel has ever seen. So that's like kind of the first time where I've really thought of it now as my career. Like it's arrived. It's not a future goal anymore. It's like, this is literally, it's happening. And it got to the point where after a really successful November, I was like, I'm not even going to bother getting a job. Like I'm not going to live well. I am making probably about as much, if not probably less actually, than I did at uni. But if I'm frugal and I get through this off season, and I am dedicated, like I can go through this period where I potentially never work for anyone else again. So, So how I'm planning to do it, partly there's the motivation piece where I need to do it to eat. But thankfully, we live in an age where coverage is so easy. Well, so much better than it used to be. So I can watch every game that I want to. I do have to get up early, but like I said, like this is my job. So, if I have to get up at 5 to watch an Eagles game, fine. I'll get up, make the content, maybe have a nap after, get up, make some more content. Like that rhythm and routine that I've gotten in the last 3 months has really worked. And sure, there's limitations. And like, in an ideal world, I'll have a studio with a better set. Like I realize the production quality isn't what it could be. But like I said, the strategy right now is to try and get people to maybe buy into what the future could be. And when I'm back in Perth or potentially in Melbourne one day, the platform will look a lot different. So that's kind of the thinking at the moment. So like I said, the travel part and TrueFooty were two different concepts. And now it's only the first time where I'm like, ooh, being in the UK is probably not ideal for this, but there's still a lot I can achieve.
And again, I think, yes, there can be stuff about production qualities and sets and locations and those sort of things, but I think the voice and the opinion is what people still gravitate towards. And so you could be sitting out there with this, the world passing by you. And I think as long as you've got meaningful things to say, then people still kind of attach to it. So hopefully those logistics are no barrier to you. But we touched on before, obviously you've got those resolutions. The content is still coming. I think if people are able to nail the preseason or the off season, then the actual core season itself, that's the easy part.
Exactly, mate. Like if I got through December making enough money to pay the rent and buy my groceries. I might have had one haircut. So, that's actually, on a somewhat serious note, that has given me a lot of faith that maybe this is financially viable as a career. It's not going to be particularly lucrative, but if I can get through December and January and not starve, then it gives me a lot of freedom to really launch into making it my career. And if I have that mindset, then the content's going to get better and hopefully it will just improve exponentially.
Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities in that, and absolutely there's kind of the on and off seasons when it comes to all things footy, and that extends to the creation of content around it. But if you can nail that off season, then you're off to a pretty damn good head start, and clearly you are well and truly on your way, which is awesome to hear. So I guess as we kind of filter a little bit back towards the game itself, how do you see things traveling for the Eagles going into 2024? Obviously, Harley Reid's come along. We will note Geelong supporter. So how do you feel about the prospect of him coming home to us at some point?
I feel great about it, Paul. Yeah, no, really open to it.
we can't wait for him we'll open the doors, open arms. It'd be great.
Oh, yeah. Look, I'm pretty braced for that possibility. Like a lot will happen in 6 to 8 years, when he hits free agency maybe or whatever. But, Judd did 6 years with us and that turned out all right. So one thing at a time, the way I see it is we've got this next few years, the first 3 years of his contract to really sell a future to him that this is worth sticking around at, because if he'd been here for 22 and 23, I think it's an uphill battle to convince him to stay, but I have faith. As for our on-field fortunes, I know this is really cliche, but I just really do think that the injuries had such an enormous effect on West Coast. I don't think it's the reason we finished bottom 4. That might have happened anyway. We might have finished bottom 2. But the difference between us being a normal bottom 2 side and the depths of hell that we reached in 2023 were enormous. So I'm bracing for a bottom 2 finish. I think there's a chance we finish higher than North purely because of the age demographics, and they're the youngest team and the least experienced team. And they've just, taken 2 high draft picks they're going to need to give games to.
These things take time.
Yeah, that's right. So, and we finished the same amount of wins last year. So if I had to guess where we're going to finish, I'd say 17th, but I am bracing for that sort of bottom of the ladder finish. What are your thoughts on the Eagles?
Look, I think to your point, and again, it is cliche, but injury absolutely plays a gigantic part in it, because I really feel like that was a pretty big factor in what happened with Geelong this year as well. I've been doing a whole bunch of player report cards for every single player in the club, and they've been gradually rolling out on the YouTube channel. And I realized once I'd put them all together, because when you're looking at them in isolation, you just focus on this player, how the season went, whatever. But when I looked at them all as I'm starting to upload them and get them all ready to go, I'm like, injury. Oh my God. Realize the number of those where the messaging ended up being the same, which was like they weren't, it wasn't an ACL where they were knocked out for the whole year. But I think someone who really represented the scenario for the Cats pretty well over the year was Mitch Duncan, who, really well known for his disposal and how clean he is. But then as I put together his report card and I looked at his stats and I looked at the games played, he played about 15, 16. You go, okay, that's not too bad. But it wasn't like he missed an 8-week block. It was played for 2 or 3, missed 1 or 2, played for another, then missed it, and it was just this constant thing, which for a player like that, where the sleep disposal is the key to his game. If you can't get that continuity in your game, it takes a game or two to kind of get back up to speed, no matter who you are, no matter how experienced you are, the quality of the player, it takes a game or two to just kind of get that clean disposal and that back up to speed with it again. And if he gets 1 or 2 games and then boom, he's out again, he never actually gets going at any point. And he was really emblematic of it. But I looked at the whole club and it was a similar sort of story. And really the Eagles, similar sort of thing, where it was just, now some of them were longer term injuries rather than just 1 or 2 at a time. But a club gets decimated, there's not a lot you can do. You bring in new faces who aren't ready. Their bodies aren't ready. They're maybe not ready to actually step up to implement the game plans. Like, these things naturally happen. So it's a massive credit to the Oscar Ellens and the Tim Kellys who, managed to kind of do their bit to hold things together over the course of the year, because it was a really challenging year.
I'm glad you highlighted Tim Kelly there, actually. I think he's probably
a little bit of love from
underrated. Yeah, true. Yeah, but I mean, he doesn't really get that much of a supportive rap from neutrals because they just associate him with being a decent player in a terrible team. And to be fair, people aren't watching West Coast too closely. But the point you make about injuries is a really good one. I think the other piece is like synergy, like players, particularly at West Coast, the midfield mix, the defensive mix was completely different week to week for a while there, and it's just useless. But the other thing is, like, injury excuses, they don't get remembered. All that goes into the history books is that Geelong finished 12th or 13th or whatever. Yeah. West Coast finished second last and then last. And the narrative around is just that West Coast suck and that Geelong's
falling off a cliff.
They've fallen off a cliff like people have expected for a while. And no matter how valid that excuse, if you want to call it that, is, it won't get remembered. And I think we kind of just have to cop that and wait to be proven right. And for me, I said that going into 23. The injuries got worse, so I'm hoping not to be saying the same thing 12 months from now, Paul.
So what was your, I guess, there was a bit of consternation and some opinion growing about the medical program at the Eagles. And obviously we've seen a little bit occur in that space since. I guess, how are you feeling about what's gone on there in the last couple of years in terms of the way that injuries have been managed, etc.?
I think it's a mixed bag of everything. It's not a particularly sexy answer. Like, I think it's human nature to try and want to blame one thing, and then that's the answer. That's the solution, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is, a lot of our injuries were impact injuries. 7 of our injuries came in one game this year, and several of them were
they? Holy crap!
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was that bad.
The Western Derby, we had 2 players like rip hamstrings off the bone. Another player break his ankle. That was Jamie Cripps. Shuey did a hamstring, which for him always turns out to be a couple months. An MCL to Campbell Chester. There was just severe real, and it's stuff like Jamie Cripps' leg getting caught under another player, or you can never
control those things.
100%. Liam Ryan going for a screamer and landing on his back, and it somehow tore his hamstring. It was just ridiculous. But so that's part of it. But there is no doubt that over a period of time, we did see a lot of lesser known players in particular just keep doing the same injuries. So Luke Edwards kept having a groin injury, as did Harry Edwards. Jack Petruccelli did his hamstring about 7 times in 3 years, I reckon. And then, Yo's calves and Shuey's hamstrings. It's just, there's a clear pattern there. And then there's also horrific luck with impact injuries as well. So as much as I'd like to blame one thing, it was kind of just everything went wrong. But I like to think we're going to rectify some of those, strength and conditioning things to at least prevent the stuff we can control.
Yeah, exactly. Collision impact-based ones, not a lot you can do. And it's just unfortunate if they happen to pair with a bit of bad luck in terms of the conditioning and then some of the muscle-based injuries that occur afterwards. But hopefully, for the sake of you and all Eagles fans and players next year, 2024 is a much cleaner run in that space, and the bill of health is looking a lot better. We all start at square one, right?
Yeah, that's right. I just want some wins. Like, not too many. We want a good draft pick. But give us 5 or 6. Give us 5 or 6. And
5 or 6 and come away with pick 5 or 6 as a result, and it's a good year, right?
You know what? Even if it's 4 and we don't lose a game by 171 points, I'll be okay.
Yeah, I guess how'd you reflect on that day? That was rough.
It was. It was almost funny. I didn't actually laugh, but it got to the point where I was just like, this is insane. I'm gonna put up some content of me taking the piss out of the Eagles. So I kind of turned it into an opportunity, but it was horrific, and there's no comeback. It's like, okay, there's injuries, but that got so bad. You know what I mean? So, like I said, this whole Eagles thing is very multifactorial. It's not purely injuries, and I don't mean to suggest that, because I think there has been a rot. It's just that the injuries have compounded that so much, and we haven't been able to fix that, if that makes sense.
No, of course.
But I think it's, confidence as well. The players, are used to losing by a lot. Yeah, so City get a fast start, and, even the senior players are dropping their heads, and it's kind of hard to blame them. Like I was thinking of Tim Kelly in that game, and he got slaughtered for some bad efforts, which is justified. But at the same time, I'm like, I can understand why this guy's like, why did I come to West Coast? Like, collectively, and I've played in teams that lost by that much, and I tell you what, you just don't want to get the ball at that point. So that was psychological, and it is disappointing that it got to that point. But I'm hoping that, if we rectify the things earlier in the domino effect of the injuries, that it hopefully never gets to that point again. It was shameful, but we move on.
Yeah. I think like being on the end of one of those sort of hidings, you don't blame anyone, I guess, if they find themselves in that spot. I guess personally, like I guess as a Geelong sport, I've been very fortunate. Certainly, like my entire adult life, I turned 18 in 2007. So my entire adult life has been a Geelong who's been dishing out those sort of things. I think about the Richmond game that kind of kicked it all off in 2007. I think about the Melbourne game. We've dished it out to quite a few teams over the journey. And fortunately,
you got us with a good one in 08 as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only kind of real hiding that kind of sticks in my head, actually, there's kind of two of them, was 2008 against Collingwood, just out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It was like round 9 or 10. We hadn't lost, and suddenly they came out and pantsed us by 90 points or something like that. And then, unfortunately, the prelim against Collingwood in 2010, where look, there was nothing that was going to stop them. It was Gary Ablett's last game as well for Geelong before leaving, but it was just they're the only ones I can really think of, and their magnitude's less than what you've described with that game and what Geelong has dished out over the journey as well. So, and even playing footy through my junior years, we were one of those teams. We played in 5 grand finals in a row. We won 3 straight, with bookended by losses, unfortunately, but won the 3 in the middle. And so we were just dishing out hidings left, right, and center. I remember many 200 plus point wins
wow.
Unfortunately, if it was your day kind of hanging out in the back line, it was a real boring day in the back line. Like you'd be kind of digging into the turf, just making games of noughts and crosses and playing them with your opponent, because they knew they weren't getting the ball, and I knew I didn't have to defend all day. So, and it wasn't the modern game where you can maybe just kind of float up the ground and that sort of thing. It's this is you're playing back pocket. You don't leave that defensive 50. So,
oh jeez,
like okay, I probably need to go for a run after this just to burn some energy. But anyway, I feel awful for any club that kind of has to go through those sort of games, because even your best players, as you say, and TK is a great example, it's demoralizing, and even the best will go back into their shell a little bit. It's just a natural thing.
Yeah, it's a human response to that.
Yeah, hopefully no more of them going forward. Maybe we're not too far away from the Eagles dishing out 1 or 2 of those out again sometime soon.
Yeah, well, after 08, where Geelong, I remember, I'll never forget that game. You beat us by 135 points. After that game, if you'd told us we'd make the top 4 in 3 years, or no, 2 seasons after that, I think. Yeah. Maybe it was 3, sorry. But either way, and then play you in a prelim, like that timeline does not make sense. So I don't think that's going to happen, but, without sounding too arrogant, I just think these strong clubs do tend to bounce back quicker than some of your other clubs that are not renowned for doing so, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm
there's a cultural thing there.
I'm justifiably confident. Yeah, it is kind of a cultural thing. Yeah.
So it is only a matter of time. As we start to wrap things up, some kind of top level, non necessarily super specific questions there. You've had the opportunity, and I'll ask it about the Eagles and the Cats, since we are a Cats based show. Firstly, the Eagles, in your eyes, who is the greatest Eagle that the club's ever had in your eyes? And I say greatest, so best is a whole other thing. Obviously, skill, though we're talking the big picture here, the everything about the person.
I think it's Judd. I don't think any other player at West Coast has really hit those heights of being the clear best player in the competition. There's a lot of talk about Peter Matera, and Cuz was damn good, and I think Kerr wasn't even that far behind, but I don't think anyone did as much as Judd. And when you consider he was 20 or 21 when he won the Brownlow, like it's just
absurd.
It's insane. So he's the answer.
That's fair. I guess as an outsider looking in, what would you say when it comes to an answer for the Cats? Who'd be the greatest Cat of all time?
I mean, I'm 93 born and watched footy 02 onwards. I think the clear answer is Gary Ablett Jr.
Yeah.
In that era. I have seen some highlights of his old man, but I just don't know the answer to that because highlights are just highlights, right? So I'd say Gary Ablett Jr. again was just clearly the best player of the competition for a while there and was doing things that I hadn't seen a player of his size. And in a way, not really that athletic, but the things he did were just stupid. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with that?
I mean, there's a blanket of players you could probably, a blanket you could probably throw over a few players that fit that one. And it really depends on the lens you want to look at it through. If you really want to go down the pure on-field stuff, then you go, okay, the Gary Abletts, either one of them. I saw a great thing just the other day that was the two best players of all time. I can't remember who put the piece out there now. It popped up on social media though. The two best players of all time are Gary Ablett, and obviously the reference being both father and son. And like I can totally see it. And then I think about a Joel Selwood, for example, who was not necessarily of their level in terms of actual ability, but his leadership on field and off it, the things he does in the community, all those sort of things. Like it's and I think Chris Judd really fits that sort of model as well because he was such a great influence for kids on and off the field, which I think is what sets him apart from a Ben Cousins and those sort of things. But, they obviously had their off-field indiscretions. Juddy was, as far as we know, squeaky clean. And even today, like there's kind of the fun and games edge to some of the stuff that he'll do in media, but ultimately does what he can, looks out for people. He's really kind of considerate and caring. I think it's always been a quality that I respected of him, as well as the on-field exploits. And certainly, some of those days of seeing Gary Jr. going head-to-head with Chris Judd were when both were kind of at or around the peak of their powers was something incredible to watch. So for me, I'd probably go Joel just because of the off-field component as well. But I don't blame anyone, I guess, for making a choice that's not him. There's a blanket of great players you can pick. Of the current Eagles crop, who's I guess who's the player that you just can't take your eyes off, the love child, for whatever better phrase?
I'm pleased to say there's a handful of them, which people wouldn't really know because we get annihilated so much. And only Eagles fans know who the good young Eagles are, really. But if I had to nominate one, I'll say Elijah Hewitt. I do think this guy has elite traits. And obviously, a lot goes into becoming an elite footballer. But I think of, I know there's a young Petrarca is almost a comparison where he's not necessarily going to become Petrarca, but in terms of his natural gifts, not exactly the same sort of player. But I think if it clicks for him, he will be in that top echelon of top 5 players in the game. I think he has that potential, but again, getting there is a completely different thing. But he's already given us some highlights, and I can't wait for more.
No, that's awesome. And so I guess that kind of links into one of my other questions there, which is, I guess, relates to similar sort of concept. We're talking about players potentially of the future. For Cats fans looking over at the Eagles, who's someone they should be really keeping an eye on, besides my jokes before about Harley Reid? Setting Harley aside, I guess, who is a player that perhaps is sneaking under the radar that we should be keeping an eye on, potentially having a big breakout 2024?
Sorry, was it the context of this players that Geelong might poach? Or
no. I make my jokes about Harley Reid and us poaching him, but just
I see. Yeah.
If you're just looking over the Eagles, who looks like they're ready and primed to make that big jump this coming year?
Good question. I think this is hard for West Coast.
We're not trying to poach everyone, I promise.
Yeah, right. I think it's a tough one because we've had like so many players around that range either be like or around that age where they typically break out. They've either been delisted because they were taken late in drafts or whatever, or they've had their injury issues. if I had to nominate one, I think Brady Hoff probably is one of those names that probably just isn't that well known outside of WA.
Yeah.
But he's actually become quite a reliable defender. And, I think he shut Charlie Cameron down to 7 disposals when we played up at the Gabba when they were having an avalanche inside 50s. But also looks very assured with the ball. He's quick, he's tall. Maybe not necessarily an elite player one day, but maybe his ceiling is like a Brad Shepherd or something like that, who it was an All-Australian. So he's the one I like that's underrated.
Yeah, nice. And yeah, we'll see if we can pay. No, we won't. We won't pay.
He's West Australian. Hands off.
No, that's fine. He'll stay. There's nothing we can do about that then. Schoolyard pick. Just a lighter question here. Schoolyard pick, and we've spoken about Gary Jr. and Senior already, but you're building a team, and you've got Gary Ablett Jr., Gary Ablett Senior at the peak of their power, standing in front of you. I know you've only seen the highlights, but we obviously know the nature of the roles which they'd play. You're building a team. You've got those two standing in front of you. Which way are you going to go?
Oh, how many players were aside? Because that's relevant.
Let's assume. Yeah, let's assume you're going to build an on-field of 18.
You probably go the big man, and that's Gary Senior. Purely because you could just plonk him at full forward, and he can probably just run into the guts and knock people over. So he can probably do a lot of what Gary Jr. does. And I don't know if Gary
he was a midfielder for a time.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah, I vaguely remember that. Or remember hearing that. Junior probably couldn't do some of the things Senior did. Senior could probably do some of the things that Junior does, if that makes sense. So that's probably my schoolyard pick. No,
that's fair. There's not many 1,000-goal forwards out there, but I don't want to be too disparaging to Gary Jr., but there's obviously a lot of players that can accumulate 30 plus disposals. So maybe not do some of the things he can do, but certainly get hands on the ball. There's a lot of those. So
true.
Another thing that I want to discuss just before we wrap things up is the women's game. Obviously, we've got all 18 teams in the comp now. It was a little bit of a challenging year for the Eagles at points, but I guess how are you feeling about how the girls are traveling and how that competition itself is continuing to grow?
Yeah, it is good. I think it's one of those things where I don't know if other Eagles fans can relate to this, but there's something a little bit tough about it when your team, and I know this is ironic because the men's team has been getting annihilated, but because it's taken the Eagles girls so long to sort of bridge the gap on the rest of the competition, it's been kind of hard to get invested on an emotional point of view. We've kind of just had to be patient and be like, we'll get there. I mean, there's some really good young players there, the Ella Roberts girl in particular. I think they've harnessed the talent really well, they've drafted the talent really well. It's just about sort of optimizing it. And I'm excited about what Daisy Pearce can do. I don't know what the general consensus about her is, but I kind of find her to be, I like her. So
Daisy's unreal, and we're shattered to be losing her. So we only had her for a year. I've already spoken to a few people from the club that are, obviously they all wish her nothing but the best, but they are devastated to lose her influence. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
It really shows the great quality of Daisy, and I think it was pretty well apparent in terms of the way she kind of portrayed herself media facing anyway. But it just sounds like that quality of the person runs so much deeper than anything that we ever see. So I think she's going to be amazing for the girls.
That's good to know, because obviously kind of just judging on the surface level of the way she presents in the media, and she's deeply analytical and comes up with really good insights. So I'm like, that on itself makes her sort of present as probably a good coach. So if she's a good person as well, then hopefully we're primed for some success in 2024.
Yeah, it sounds like you're onto a winner there, and I'm sure the ladder climb will be pretty rapid. I guess both for the men's and the women's, I'm sure. Jesse, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show and to kind of learn about this journey through, I guess, your experiences with the Eagles, through TrueFooty, and a whole lot more. If people do want to check out all of the stuff, I better make sure you have all the opportunity in the world to plug the show, to plug the platform, the socials. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Honestly, if you're going to find one place to find me, is just TrueFooty on YouTube. I'm on Instagram, TrueFooty Official, and TikTok for the same reason. But I care more about people finding me on YouTube, and hopefully, I'm priming for a big 2024. I'm planning to improve the content in a big way this year, and getting real serious about it now. So I'd appreciate people checking out the stuff, but I really appreciate you taking me onto this show and giving me the time of day, mate. It's been a great chat, so thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been awesome to chat. Please make sure people go check out all the True Footy content. Again, there's multiple different platforms there, but hit up the YouTube channel, throw the subscription that way. Cats fans, there's plenty of stuff there. As I mentioned before, the New Year's resolutions and a whole range of other pieces there. So you've got that Geelong focus stuff, but there's a whole range of really fascinating insights across all of the clubs. So make sure to check all that stuff out. Jesse does an amazing job. And mate, I wish you nothing but the best over the course of the remainder of this off season into 2024. Hopefully we start to see the Eagles climbing off the canvas a little bit. Hopefully they don't beat the Cats at all over the course of the year, but
unlikely.
We find ways to lose games we shouldn't. So I won't rule anything out. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome, mate.
Thanks, mate. Likewise, it's been a pleasure.
Cats fans, if you haven't already done so, please make sure to subscribe to the Hoops Crew on YouTube. Check out Behind the Play on podcast feeds. All that support really, really helps as we also try to grow in 2024. But otherwise, thanks a lot for watching. Remain Geelong strong, and I'll see you next time.